I thought it might be helpful.
Sorry, I should have started earlier.
Okay. So I thought it would be helpful for others to kind of see, how you could try things differently. And that's not to say that Orton Gillingham isn't effective. It is. I've used it successfully with kids, but I'm always just trying to learn more and improve my practice. So I feel like we never stop learning.
Yep. And that was the same for me. As a reading tutor, I've spent years with one student or one or two students for 3 years, and I just wanted something that was a little more efficient. And lo and behold, this came up. So we want to share this information with all of our members. And without further ado, Jennifer, Cerra.
Okay. So we're calling this instructional swaps, teaching the basic code with structured linguistic literacy. That's a little bit of a mouthful, structured linguistic literacy, but that's sort of the name that we're going with right now. Donna's part of a small group of teachers, educators that I've sort of recently, she invited me to join, and this is the name that we are kind of going with right now to try to create some clarity around what this approach is. So let's get started. So here are our goals for today. The first thing I'll do is describe the similarities and the differences between linguistic literacy. So that's what I'm going to be calling it, linguistic literacy for short, which is that speech to print approach and the speech to print instruction. So we'll look at the similarities and the differences. I'm going to highlight 5 instructional swaps that can be made when teaching the basic code. And what I mean by the basic code, we'll get into that more specifically in a minute. And then we'll describe and demonstrate core activities that can be used to streamline and integrate instruction. So those are the goals for today. So let's start with, what do I mean by the basic code? So I mean one-to-one sound symbol correspondence. So this would be your CVC words. These are when you're first teaching students how to read and spell. Your CVC words, your consonant clusters like stop and lump. And then I also include those common consonant digraphs, such as the SH pattern and ship. So to me, that's what I mean by the basic code. Now I want to distinguish the basic code from the advanced code. Because we are not going to be talking about the advanced code today. And what I mean by the advanced code is where we're teaching variations. So one example would be in the advanced code, we would teach the O sound with all of the most common ways to spell O. Now, this really is kind of a different animal than what I'm going to be showing you today. A lot of the philosophy behind it's the same, but the instructional methods are going to be a little bit different. So we thought it would make the most sense to start with the basic code today. And then at a later date, we'll dig into the advanced code, because if you try to do all of this at once, it can be very overwhelming. So today we're really just focusing on the basic code. So let's look at, when we're looking at similarities, linguistic literacy and that print to speech approach, or more traditional phonics approach. So we're teaching the same foundational skills. So the foundational skills are the same, but we go about teaching it differently. So what do I mean by the foundational skills? Well, one of them would be the alphabetic code. In other words, teaching those phoneme, grapheme correspondences and that connection. We also will teach phonological awareness, which, remember, is sort of that umbrella term. So when we talk about phonological awareness, we're recognizing and manipulating spoken parts of language, and that's all of the spoken parts. So syllables, rhymes, but then also getting into that phoneme level, which we know is critical. And both approaches spend a lot of time with blending and segmenting. So by blending, we mean we're putting those sounds together, and by segmenting, we're pulling those sounds apart. And then we're also looking at fluency. We're improving fluency, that rate, the reading rate, the accuracy, and also expression. So we're doing the same foundational skills, but we're doing them differently. So that's what I'm really going to be highlighting in this presentation. So when we look at linguistic literacy, what are the instructional differences? So here's some things that you're going to really see with a linguistic literacy approach that you might not see with the print to speech approach. The first one, which is really critical, is we're teaching the alphabetic principle. And what we mean by that is that our written language is a code for sounds. The sounds we say, which are the phonemes, are represented by letters, which are the graphemes. And a really easy way to explain this to students, if you're working with a 4 or 5-year-old or 6-year-old, even older kids, that letters are pictures of sounds. And the first time I had read that was in the Reading Reflex, which was the book that the creators of phonographics wrote. And it just really stuck with me. I thought that was a really great way of explaining it, because oftentimes kids don't really understand that. They don't really understand what letters are for, and they're really just pictures of sounds. Now, the instruction for a linguistic literacy approach is oriented around teaching the phonemes. We start with the phonemes. And of course, we teach those phoneme grapheme representations, but we start with the phoneme versus starting with the grapheme. When we look at the phonemes, we have between 40 to 44 phonemes, depending on dialect, but over 200 graphemes. So it's kind of daunting to think, oh my goodness, I have to teach all of the graphemes. No, you have to teach the phonemes and the different ways that we can show those phonemes. So it's a little bit less overwhelming, I think, from an instructional approach from the teacher's point of view and also from the students. We're also going to prioritize letter sounds over letter names. And I'm not saying not to teach the letter names, but we prioritize the sounds because it's the sounds that's actually going to help the student read and spell. Another big one is that mastery is not expected before moving to a new concept. And this actually is in line with my particular OG training. We really followed that philosophy as well. But you will see that many packaged OG programs do not follow that. And it can take, as Donna was saying, years for kids. We also know now that that's actually not how kids learn best. And so we'll get into the kind of scientific explanation about why we don't expect mastery before moving on. And then when we're teaching the advanced code, which we're not actually getting into today, but when we get to that advanced code teaching, we're teaching multiple sound spellings at once rather than one at a time. And so the example I gave on the earlier slide is we have many ways of showing O, and we would actually teach all of those at once. We would not teach one at a time. And that's very different from your traditional phonics. We also focus on spelling patterns rather than spelling rules. And I can tell you that for a lot of struggling learners, the amount of time it takes to teach them the rules, have them remember the rule, apply the rule, a lot of them, no matter how many times you go over it, they still don't remember it anyway. So we can find a better way. We don't have to have all of those rules. And then the last one, which is a really big one, is integrating the instruction. So these are the swaps we'll be going over. When we get to the last swap, that's when we'll be doing some video demonstrations. So I videotaped myself working with some students, and actually one student in particular, so you can kind of see the progression. But these are the swaps we'll be going over. So the first one is focus on the phoneme. Number 2 is lay off the letter names. Number 3 is start with speech. Number 4, pick up the pace. And number 5, integrate instruction. So let's start with swap number 1. We're going to focus on the phoneme. So instead of teaching phonological sensitivity activities, such as rhyming, having kids clapping syllables, try instead teaching at the phoneme level as soon as reading instruction begins. Now, for most kids, that's kindergarten, could be preschool for some. But we spend a lot of time in kindergarten with phonological sensitivity activities that actually don't move kids along for their reading and their spelling. So why am I suggesting this swap? Well, we know that it's phonemic awareness. If you look at all of the research, that's what's actually going to make kids better readers and better spellers, because phonemic awareness is needed for orthographic mapping to occur. Now, if you're not familiar with what orthographic mapping is, it's that process our brain goes through to take a word we've never seen before and have it be a instantly recognizable word. It's in our long-term memory. We pull it, we read it. It's the glue. So that phonemic awareness is really the glue. The words don't stick without it. So we really need to focus on that. We can do rhyming and syllables till the cows come home, but if we're not doing phonemic awareness, the words won't stick. So Susan Brady, and I'll kind of refer to this at the end when I go over some resources of different things you might want to look into. Dr. Susan Brady did a really great webinar on this very topic, and she goes through all of the research. So I'm not going to be going over the research, but if you're interested in finding out more about this, she talks about all of the research that supports letting go of those phonological sensitivity activities, focusing on the phoneme. And in a way, it's not as much a swap as it is sort of a deletion. If you can kind of let go of some of those activities, just focus on the phoneme. So what do we mean by phonemic awareness activities? So what are the ones we're really focusing on? So the research shows being able to segment. So if we have a word like mat, can we hear those individual sounds and pull them apart? At. And then blending. Can we put those sounds back together and read it? Mat. So we're pulling apart, we're putting together. So those two skills are critical. However, they're not enough. We need to also be able to manipulate phonemes, and we can do that through activities like word chaining. We can do oral phonemic awareness tasks where we are taking sounds out, putting sounds in. So if we have slip and we change slip to slap, we're putting in, we have the we're taking that out, we're putting in a. We change slap to clap, we're taking out, putting in. So it's that manipulation, deletion, substitution. Kids have to have that phonemic proficiency in order for those words to really stick in their reading to be automatic. So we want to focus on that. Now, there is a time and place for phonological sensitivity activities, and they can certainly be integrated in other ways. For instance, teachers who are always doing poetry, that's a great time to work on rhyming. When we get into the multi-syllable level and kids are reading and spelling multisyllabic words, then yes, they will have to be able to syllabicate words. So those things have kind of their time and place, but it's not going to help your kids learn to read and spell when they're first starting out. And then of course, anytime we do a dictation task, we're asking kids to write a sentence, they have to take that sentence and they have to be able to segment it into individual words. So we're doing these things in an integrated way. There's another way you can do it, but it shouldn't be during reading and spelling instruction. So the next one is lay off the letter names. And don't panic, because I'm not saying don't teach letter names. Kids need to know the names of letters. But instead of, I'm going to show you this card. I bet many of you have seen this before from a very popular phonics program. Instead of saying the letter name with a keyword and a sound, A, apple, A, B, ball, ba, and you keep going through that, instead of doing all of that, instead, let's just get rid of all of the noise and focus on what's important. So we want to really establish that phoneme grapheme connection. So what can you do instead? So if you have a card like this that you have to do maybe as part of your phonics instruction, I would recommend making your own cards, but just have the letter. Just show that grapheme that you're trying to teach. And when you show the grapheme, you're asking the student to retrieve the sound. And they just give you ah. And you can do the opposite. You can provide the student with the sound, ah, and they have to provide you with the grapheme. So you can do it both ways. Now, this is also in line with my OG training. We never used pictures. We did not say the letter name. That was confusing for our students. We only focused on the letter sound correspondence. So that's a really easy swap to make. Just focus on that phoneme grapheme connection. So why is this a swap that I'm suggesting? Well, first of all, research does show that retrieval practice does improve learning. And we know that different kids do require different amounts of that retrieval practice. Some kids learn it very quickly, while others need many, many, many repetitions. So it really depends on your students. But I would argue that including a picture, the letter name, the letter sound, really muddles the instructional focus, which we know is the phoneme grapheme connections. We really want kids to focus on that. You could go through this card deck and you could go through all those letters and sounds, and the child might not even be looking at the letter at all. They might just be looking at the apple or the picture of the ball. So there's really no need to have those cards with those pictures. In fact, most of my students, they're all kids who struggle. Many are diagnosed with dyslexia. I don't use keywords or pictures for any of them, and none of them need it. The other thing we want to kind of caution about when we're teaching the letter names and the letter sounds is that our struggling readers can have confusion. And this one I see all the time. In fact, I just assessed a kindergartner and a second grader recently in the past week, and both of them had the same issue, confusing the letter name with the sound. So if we look at the letter Y, the name of the letter Y, we hear W. And so kids can have a lot of confusion with that. Now, if you're a typically developing reader, probably going to be fine learning both, although I would still say we should be focusing on the sound over the letter name. They shouldn't be of equal importance. But for your struggling learners, really confuse them. So we just have to be careful about that and be aware and really put the sound first. That will be better for all of our kids. Because when we first are working with students, we don't always know right away who will struggle. So we just have to be mindful of those struggling learners. So what am I going to recommend instead? So we know we have to teach the letter names and the sounds. So what can we do so that we're not confusing those struggling learners? Well, I'm going to suggest that anytime you're doing reading or spelling instruction, you refer to the sound. You focus on that sound and don't use them interchangeably. Now, if you're working with older students and you know that there's no confusion, that's a different situation. But when you're working with beginning readers, try to avoid using the letter names. However, we need to teach the letter names. So one idea is when you're doing your handwriting instruction, that could be a good time to review the names. So that way it kind of gives it a little bit of separation and might support your struggling learners. Now, I need to point out that most speech-to-print programs or linguistic literacy programs don't teach those sounds in isolation at all. They don't do the sounds, or most of them don't do the sounds or the graphemes in isolation. But it can be helpful for those beginning readers that just need a lot of exposure, or some of our older struggling learners who just require a ton of retrieval practice, and that's just something that they need. So it isn't really a one size fits all. We really need to look at the individual student and see what they need. Now, I would say that this kind of instruction is most effective in small group because some kids don't really need to go over the letters and sounds every day, while others might need it. One way, if you're a classroom teacher, I know it's overwhelming. You have so much on your plate already. One thing you could consider to monitor a student's understanding of sound symbol correspondence is just by doing a quick dictation. So rather than going through those cards every day and having everybody read it at the same time, you could check in with them and you could give a dictation. You say the sound and ask the students to write it. That way you know if they really know it or if they don't, because we do know that many of our kids are sort of writing the coattails of their classmates and they're not saying the sounds at all. They're not really getting anything out of that instruction. So that's just those are just a few things to consider when teaching those letter sound correspondences. Then we have swap 3, and this is a big one. We want to start with speech. So in a traditional program, phonics program, the teacher will start with the grapheme. They'll hold up a card with an SH and say, SH says shh. That's what's typical. Now, my training was not that way. I have to just say my training did actually start with speech and move to print. But we want to make sure that we are instead, oh, hold on, I see something in the chat. I want to make sure that it's not a message from Donna. Okay, I will definitely take questions at the end. So definitely put in your questions and we'll address that at the end. So sorry, I'm going to go back to that now. So instead of starting with the grapheme, we want to instead have the students start by saying a word and start with their speech, start by saying a word with that desired phoneme. And we want them to feel what they're saying, pay attention to what's coming out of their mouth. What are you saying? What sound is coming out of your mouth? So here's an example of how this could look. Now, I just want to also say, I will be going over this. You'll see a video demonstration of this. So after I go over it, if you're still a little fuzzy on what this looks like, we will be showing you this, what I'm describing, we'll be showing this in the videos. So for instance, I want to teach that SH is the sh and is the way we show the sh sound. How do I do that? Well, I would start by asking the student to say a word with that sh. So I'd say to the student, say ship. The student repeats it, ship. And then I'm going to have some placeholders. I might have numbers here, but I want to show the student that there are 3 sounds in ship. That's why I have 3 lines. And I'm going to say to the student, what's the first sound you said in ship? I'm going to drag my finger, showing them that there's 3 sounds, having them really pay attention to what are they saying? What's actually coming out of their mouth? So because first they have to say it and then they can hear it. So if you ask them that way, what's the first sound you said? And then you would have letter tiles to have the student build it. And then what's the second sound in ship? And then they build it. Last sound, what's the last sound in ship? And they would build the word ship. Now, there's more to it than this, which we'll get to, but this is how you would introduce it with speech and then moving to print. Now, why are we suggesting that we start with speech? Well, this reinforces the alphabetic principle that letters are pictures of our speech sounds. We always want to start with speech because speech is natural. That's what we're born with. But the graphemes, the letters, they're a human creation. They're man-made. And so we want to start with what's natural for the student, what the student already has, which is their speech. And swap number 4, which is a big one, is picking up the pace. So instead of teaching to mastery before moving on, and we know there are programs out there, I spoke to a parent probably about a month ago. She spent 8 months, or maybe it was even 9 months, working on 4 digraphs. I mean, I can't even imagine how frustrated her child must have been, but she couldn't move on until mastery. The child had mastered it. So we're suggesting we're not teaching to mastery before moving on. We're introducing a concept. We're reviewing it. So we're always reviewing. We're reviewing in a variety of ways, and it's also cumulative. So the student's learning a new letter sound correspondence. The next new learning, you're bringing that sound symbol correspondence back in. So I'll show you an example. This is an activity I do. I call it mixed mapping, where you can see a whole variety of tasks here. So, and at least in my sequence, I do like to teach CK very early on, but then that gets added in. So after then I teach that digraph TH, then I bring in the CK with it. They can build a word like thick. So having the students review in a variety of ways and also having that learning build on each other with that's what we mean by cumulative review, sort of like a snowball. And they're kind of mixing up. We're not doing a whole list for practice. It's mixed up. Doing practice in a variety of ways, making sure we're not just doing isolated work, because we have to be careful. We can't make it isolated and then just have them working on words only. We need to have them read sentences and have them read stories. So it has to be a variety of practice. So why am I suggesting that we pick up the pace? Well, studies show that learning is better when practice is spaced out. So think of that spiraling. You're doing it, you're coming back to it, you're coming back to it again, interleaved with other learning, which means we're studying a variety of things at once and not just one specific thing. And also varied. So we have different kinds of practice. Mass practice or teaching one thing to mastery is not as effective. Now, just going to put this plug in here. This is a book that I've been reading that I've really enjoyed. It's all about the cognitive science of how we learn. So if you haven't read the book, Make It Stick by Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel, I would recommend it if you're interested in learning about the cognitive science. I also love this podcast if you want to learn more about it. This is a podcast I've been listening to lately, the Learning Scientists podcast. That it's just really interesting. It's all about how we learn, not just with reading, but all kinds of learning. So those are 2 different things you can check out. And then our last swap, which is a biggie, is integrating instruction. So I'm just looking at the clock here, seeing how we are in time. So instead of teaching different skills in isolation, like we're going to do a little bit of phonemic awareness, now we're going to do a little code knowledge, now we're going to do a little reading, now we're going to do a little spelling. So instead of doing that, it's all integrated. So we have some core activities that we will use to integrate the instruction. Now, I've chosen core activities that you tend to see across any speech to print program or linguistic literacy program. I've been formally trained in 2, read multiple books, have done a lot of free webinar. So I'm familiar with about 4 different programs, officially trained into and familiar with about 4 of them. And it seems that these are kind of those core activities that you can see in all of them. But each program, I have to say, is a little different. They all have their own spin on things. So, but these are the core activities, and many of them will have more than this, but these are the ones you can kind of count on seeing. So we're going to be going over all of these. So we've got word building, word chaining, word reading and mapping, and then writing. So let's take a look at how all of these activities are so integrated. So we have word building, and that's usually used when you're introducing something new. The students are building words with tiles, and then they're mapping the words. So they're building it, and then they're saying, and they're writing the sounds, which is what we mean with phoneme grapheme mapping. I think many of you are probably familiar with that. Now look at all the skills that we're using in this one activity. The student has to segment, they have to blend, they're using and building code knowledge. They're also looking at handwriting. Now, not to say that you are going to necessarily stop every single time they make one little mistake, but you're reinforcing handwriting. You might correct it right in the moment. You might make a little note and then maybe at a later time go back and correct it. So depending on the student, you have to kind of make those instructional decisions, but we're doing all of that just in one activity. And then we have word chaining, which typically is done after you've introduced the new sound spelling, although in some programs, once the kids get to a certain stage, they don't even really do the word building, they go right to word chaining. It really just depends on the program. But when we're doing word chaining, we're changing one phoneme grapheme at a time. So that's where that manipulation comes in, the phonemic manipulation. So you can see over here all the different things we're doing: segmenting, blending, code knowledge, and again, that phoneme manipulation. Then we have word reading and mapping. So that's something you would do after the student has had some exposure, and the student is going to then decode and blend the word. Then they're going to map it, and then they're going to read it back. So again, you're blending, you're segmenting, code knowledge, handwriting, all in the same activity. And then this would be the most difficult skill, just writing or dictation. If you want to think of it as that. Sometimes that writing, it might be they're creating something, they might be creating a sentence, or you might be dictating a sentence. You might be dictating words to them of things they've already learned. This might be a review. You're working on additional things like sentence mechanics. You're having the student read back what sentence they wrote. So you're doing all of these things again. And we're just adding in learning about mechanics as well. So there's a lot built into these activities. And so the instruction is incredibly integrated and therefore really effective. Their kids are getting a lot of practice with the skills they need. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and show you a little video of each, and we've got about 15 minutes before we do question and answer. So each video, I'll let it go for about maybe 2 minutes each, just so we don't run out of time. So I won't give too many examples of each. You'll have a little bit of an opportunity to see each one. So little background on the student that I'm going to be showing some videos of. Now, I don't videotape my actual students. You'll see like a bird's eye view of the activity that we're doing. This is a little girl who is a first grader, and this was our 4th session. So she had 3 hours of instruction. This would be the next new learning. And when I first started meeting with her, she could not blend really at all. Very difficult, even blending three letters, 3 sounds. Even in isolation without letters, blending, even orally blending, couldn't do it. So you'll see how quickly this progresses. We're already working on 4 sounds. So this is a lesson where we're focusing on words with 4 sounds, initial consonant clusters.
Okay, so let's take a look at this picture. And this is a picture of a person going on a swim. Yeah. Now let's take a look. Now this shows the number of sounds we have in the word swim. So this is the word swim. Can you point to the numbers and say the sounds? Say the word slowly. Just say swim. Good. So that's going to help us think about how many sounds we hear. Now we have all the letters we need here to build the word swim. Now let's, hold on, give me 1 sec. let's take a look down here, okay, at the word. Before we move anything, let's really think about all of the sounds and listen as we say the word swim. What's the first sound we're not going to need those, just up here. What's the first sound we say in swim? Can you find the way to show and move it and say, you can put it right on that first line. Say the first sound. What's that sound? So there we go. Good. What's that sound? What's the first sound? Good. Now what's the second sound in swim? Keep your chin up and say wah. What about swim? What's the next sound in swim? Good. And what's the last sound in swim? Good job. Now what's our word again? So let's tap and good. Let's tap and say the sounds. Tap.
Swim.
Beautiful. Now I'm going to move them. I want you to tell me the sounds. You ready? What's the sound?
Swim.
Beautiful job. Take this and can you go ahead and say and write the sounds? I'm going to say as we write. Good. So what's the next sound? Good. Good. Keep that chin up. Say Good. Now tap and read.
Swim.
Swim. Excellent job. Now what we're going to do.
Okay, so I would have then continued on to a second page, but I just wanted to show you one example of word building. So the student, what I just want to kind of point out, I'm not segmenting for her. She has to segment. I'm just saying the word slowly, swim. And when you're doing the word building, you're giving them just the letters they need, all mixed up, and then they have to say the sounds and drag. I have them say the sounds again. They have to say and write. We segment again. So you're going back and forth between segmenting, blending. Now I would have done another handful of words with her. I do like to have the little pictures because sometimes we have kids who are English language learners. I also want them to always be aware that these words that we say and we write represent something. They're representing things or ideas or actions, something. So I would have done anywhere from 3 words to 6 words, depending on the student, how much time we have, and how well they're doing with it, would determine how quickly I progress to the next activity, which is going to now be word chaining.
So the first thing we're going to do is start by building the word. Watch my finger to help you. Slip. Slip.
So it's
What's the first? Say. Hold on, sweetie. Say this. Say the word slip.
Slip.
What's the first sound you say in slip? Good. What's the next? Hold on. Slow down. Let's watch me. What's the next sound you say? Listen to what you're saying and feel what you're saying in your mouth. Slip. Say slip. What's the second sound we're saying in slip? Keep your chin up when you say
Slow.
Yeah. What's the next sound in slip? Say the sound. The sound here. What did you pull? What's the sound? So far we have slip. We need slip. Good. Now I want you to touch the numbers at the bottom. Say each sound. And blend it.
Slip.
Beautiful. Now, I'm going to give you a word to change this into, but we're only going to change one sound and one letter. Are you ready to listen? But you're going to repeat it after me because I want you to hear it and feel it in your mouth. Ready? You're going to change slip to slap. Say, wait, don't before you go to move it. I want you to say it.
Slap.
Slap. Before you move anything, I want you to touch and think. Say it. Say the word.
Slap.
There you go. Good. What are we changing? What's this sound? Now touch the numbers and touch and breathe.
Slap.
Beautiful. Now watch it because this is going to help you. We're going to take a sound away. We're taking a sound away. Watch me. Ready? We're going to look at my finger. We're going to change. Watch. Slap. We're going to take a sound away to sap. Sap. What's going away?
The L.
Yeah, so just stick that back over
Sla.
here. The ooh, good. Go touch and read the sounds for me.
App. Slap.
Now let's move this over and look, touch down here.
App. Slap. App. So.
What are the first two sounds? Tell me here. Put that together.
So. Sla.
There's no ooh there. Just say
So. Sab. Sab. Sab.
what's the sound here?
Pa. App. Sap.
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 Sap is from a tree.
A sapling?
Yeah, actually, a sapling's a baby tree. So the first thing we're gonna do.
Okay, sorry, we're going to move on from that one. So there, you can see that blending is a really challenging skill for her. So what we had to first do is blend those first two sounds, that kind of continuous blending of sa, hold on to that sound, and then have the third sound. So this was a really challenging skill for her. But by pushing her a little bit harder and giving her some more challenging tasks, it's really helping her. You'll see as we progress through the different activities, how she is able to do so much more. It's kind of amazing how it works. But anyway, now we're moving on to word reading and mapping. So she'll be given the word to read. So she has to decode the word, and then she's going to map the words. We'll just do a couple of examples of this.
Okay. Now for this, what we're gonna do is practice reading some words that have those 4 sounds. Okay, now before we're gonna read. So let's look at the first word.
Glass.
Good, keep that chin up when you say, ooh, so it's cool. Good, now saying right, you're gonna say, just write it down here and say the sound. You look at where your lines go. Let's try that one again. So we wanna start kind of down here. G, say g.
Oh. Ah.
Good. Say each sound.
Ga.
You don't have to draw anything. You can just read it for me.
Glass.
Good. Just try to keep your chin up. I want to say g. Ooh. Okay. Go ahead and erase it. Here's the eraser.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead and
Oh
erase
yeah,
that one.
mini eraser.
That's a really good eraser.
Okay, I'm going to move on because of time. Again, she's decoding the word, and then she's saying and she's writing the word, she's segmenting it again, she's blending it. And you can hear that this student has a lot of difficulty. She schwas everything. So everything is ga, pa. So when I tell her, keep your chin up, I'm trying to keep that chin up. So it's g, not ga. So that's something that we're working on as well, just so you understand why you keep hearing me say, keep your chin up. So for this next task, what we're going to be doing is writing. And again, for time, what I have kids do first is I'll dictate some words, and then they'll go ahead and do a sentence. So I'm just going to show you a quick little, we don't have time to watch the whole thing, but I'm going to have her, I'm going to dictate a bunch of words. I think I dictate 5. So what I would have her do, I'll show you an example of that. But what I would have her do after dictating those 5, I would then have her read back the whole list. I'm not going to go through all of that because of time, but I will show you how I would dictate to support that learning, because she's still learning to write words with 4 sounds. So I'm going to be putting in sound lines for her to support that process. Okay, we're going to begin by doing some review of words we've already learned. But the first thing we're going to start with are some words that have 4 sounds that can be a little tricky. So to help you with this, I'm going to have you tell me the sound first. And I want you to tell me all the sounds you hear in the word. And as you're telling me each teeny tiny sound, I'm going to write a little line, and then you're going to spell the word for me, okay? So let's start by just having you repeat the word for me. Can you say the word flag? Just the whole word. Flag. Now I want you to tell me all the little sounds that you hear in flag, each teeny tiny sound. Flag. So you say flag.
Flag.
Good. Now, you see how I drew those little lines?
What you're going to do now is say the sounds and write flag. Nice and slowly say. Say flag. Say ooh. Good. Now let's say, I'm going to point, or you can point, say each sound again.
Flag.
Flag. Good. Okay. The next word we're going to do is the word snip. Say the whole word first. Just say the whole word. Snip. Now I want you to say it very slowly, each sound. Snip. Good. Now when we say this, it's n. Snip. Now say and write snip for me. So let's look at this one again. When we make this one, we're going to start here, pull down, start here, pull down, bounce up and around. Good. That's good. All right. Our next one we're going to do, okay. So you kind of get the idea. After we had about 5 words, then I would have her go back and read those back to me. Okay. So now this is an example of a sentence dictation. Oh, good. You like writing the sentences? All right. I'm going to give you a sentence. I want you to repeat the whole sentence. And then I want you to write the sentence the best that you can, and then we'll check it together.
What's that?
These are my notes that I keep, so I know what I'm going to ask you to do. I have to plan before we do our lessons. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So repeat after me. Fred ran past them.
Fred ran past them.
Go ahead and write it. Fred ran past them.
Fred ran what? In the space. Ran past
To each sound as you go.
past them. Them.
Good job. Okay, beautiful. Now, let's go ahead and read back what we wrote. Now, we want to make sure we're looking at and really sounding out what we wrote.
Fred.
Now, does that say Fred? What does that say? Okay. Now, does this say Fred? Look at what it says. What does this say? Look down. Don't look up. Look down.
Fred.
Does it say Fred? Where's the ooh? Or does it say fed?
Fed.
It says fed. You had the duh. That was correct. You had that. But right now it says fed, and we want Fred. You think you can add in the extra letter that we need? There you go. Good. Say your sounds good. Now we can read it. Fred
ran. My R changed into the N.
So let's sound it out. Does this say ran?
And.
Or does this say run?
And.
Is that what letter is that?
U.
It's a U. That's an So that would say Fred run. Can we make it say Fred ran?
Ran.
Good. So let's start at the beginning. Read it back to me.
Fred ran past them.
Good job. Now let's read it again.
Fred ran past them.
Great job. Now.
Okay, and then the next step would be reading text. So it might be sentences or a story. And we're running low on time. We've got about 10 minutes. So let's go ahead. No, I'm not going to show. This is actually not from the student. I just wanted to show an example. You don't need to jump right into a long text. You can have the student work on some sentences. This is actually an example. I had recorded one of my first graders that I just taught the O sound to, because I didn't have a video from this specific student I was working with, but just wanted to show you don't have to jump right into a story. You can start with sentences, but we're going to move on. So The next step would be reading in text. So this is an example of a little story. I had her read the first 2 paragraphs. And then the little clip that I had, I was going to show you, I read back to her so she can hear the fluent reading, and then she reads back to me again. But we're running low on time, and I want to make sure we have enough time for question and answer. So I'm just going to show, I'm going to fast forward and just show just a little bit of her reading. And you can see she's definitely struggling through it, but she's doing a great job considering 4 sessions ago, she was unable to read CVC words. So just show you a little bit of this.
Stop.
Now we're going to stop. I'm going to read from here.
I'm going to go back. You don't need to have me read.
Stop.
Bam.
What's going to happen?
They bam in together.
Yeah, he's going to hit the trash truck. Okay, I want you to come back to the beginning, and we're not going to read the whole thing. I just want you to read back to me what you've already read. Go ahead.
Fred is on
Point, and I'll point here.
a trip to his gram. Fred sits in his van. A black truck.
Do that one again.
Black truck.
Trace and say. Trace with your finger.
Truck.
Trace with your finger. You're not tracing. Trace.
Trash truck is
Point from below, and I'll point up here. A black trash truck is
in
say for front
of
him. A black trash truck is in front of him.
Stop.
Okay, so, all right, so you could see, she's doing a great job with a lot of support. The rereading is really important for kids to support them. A couple of the error corrections that I'll use is have the student trace and say. That's what she was trying to do for truck. She will trace it with her finger. The other method is coding the word or dotting it or putting dashes. Dot and dash, which was something from Emily. That was the first time I had heard it called dot and dash, and I really loved that. So that's another error correction you can use with a student. So that shows you kind of how we then can take what she learned and have her apply it right away to reading. So learning more, some information some places you could go if you want to learn a little bit more about this approach. So there was a really great article in Reading Rockets. Some of you might have already seen it, by Janine Heron et al. And I think there were about 30 researchers who contributed to it, and just kind of goes over the benefits of a speech to print approach. So it's a great article. Look into that. Again, the phonemic awareness research, that webinar Dr. Susan Brady presented with Dr. Marnie Ginsburg. And if you just Google it, put their names in, it'll come right up. It's free. It's a really excellent webinar. Distinct Magazine. I think Donna might be able to share this link. There's a link in the PowerPoint, but she might be able to share this somehow with everybody. But Distinct Magazine did an entire, I don't know if the entire magazine art from this month is on linguistic literacy, but a lot of it is, with many different articles that you can learn about.
It is. The whole month is.
It is. Okay. And then we could put the link somewhere where people can access it. And then if you haven't read Diane McGinnis's book, it's excellent. Why Our Children Can't Read and What We Can Do About It. This really gets into the theory and why this approach works for kids. So I would highly recommend that book if you're looking to read something. And then in the meantime, Nikki Pratty created a really great Facebook group, Speech to Print, Structured Linguistic Phonics Exploration. So in that group, if you're interested, you should definitely join that group. She has a Know Your Options page where she lists all the different trainings, and there are some really good ones out there. One of the things to know is that the core elements are going to be similar, but each program is a little bit different. They have some different instructional routines. They kind of all have their own flavor of doing things. So if you want to try this approach, I would highly recommend doing some sort of training and using it with fidelity, at least at first, until you have it down and can see how it's meant. You really want to use it as it's meant to be used. So you don't want to piecemeal a bunch of things together. You want to really stick with something and do it with fidelity. And now it's time for questions. So Donna, I'm going to let you.
I'm trying to find that link for you.
Well, I can, you know what, while you're doing, if you could look at the chat, I can pull it off of my PowerPoint and stick it in the chat.
Okay.
I think that might be a good way to do it. And I can put in,
So,
well, let me see, put it in. I'll put it in the chat. Okay. And then I'll also put the webinar in the chat from about the phonics. So they're both in there now.
perfect. Okay, so here are some of our questions.
I'll do my best.
Oh, you got this.
Okay.
Okay, could you put blanks for numbers of words in each sentence in dictation before student writes the words?
Did you put blanks for the number of words? Oh, as a placeholder for each word?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some kindergartners that can be helpful if they have difficulty with that. I know I remember my son's kindergarten teacher used to do that. And I think it depends on the student.
Especially if they have auditory memory issues, you want to help them out.
Yeah.
That's scaffolding.
Yeah, and what
to-
and you know what? Some kids can't hold a whole sentence.
Mhm.
So you might even need to I would always start by giving them the whole sentence. It might only be a 3-word sentence with really little ones. And then you might need to do 1 word at a time and then have them read the sentence back. So it depends on their working memory, how much they can hold in. Evely does something really great. I love, I've seen Nora do this in a bunch of her webinars where she puts in a line for the syllable and then little lines above it for each sound, which is a great scaffold for a student that needs that, even the little ones.
Mhm. Okay, next question. Are you familiar with UFly? The process you're explaining seems very similar. How do you think they compare?
So it's interesting. So UFly is very similar to the OG training that I received. I went through a 2-year graduate program. We did a 100-hour practicum working with dyslexic students. And it was a really, in terms of OG training, I think it's as good as you're going to get. It was really fabulous. And it moved very faster than a lot of kind of like the packaged OG programs. When I first looked at UFly, I thought, oh, that's almost the identical lesson plan. But UFly, one thing that was different is UFly does start with the print and then moves to the speech, as far as I've seen. I know in my training, we always started with the sound. So we would say, you know, ship, shot, shin. What do you hear? What's the first thing you hear? What's the first sound you hear in those words? Which I actually think the way we do it in the linguistic approach with the linguistic literacy of saying what's the first sound we say is a little more effective than what's the first sound you hear, because some kids can't hear it. So, you know, it's sort of like you're giving this. So back to UFly, I mean, you're doing all those foundational skills. You're doing the same foundational skills, and they do use word chaining. That's a little different than most OG programs don't necessarily do word chaining. But I think one of the biggest differences, at least from what I've found, particularly is when you get to the advanced code. With the linguistic literacy, it moves much faster at the advanced code. I have to tell you, I didn't believe it would work. The first time I watched a webinar and someone said, oh, well, you can teach O and all the different ways to spell O. I was like, are you kidding me? How can that possibly be? I was a skeptic. And then I had a student who had gotten OG in school and she still is reading almost a year behind. And I thought, she's been getting OG. She's still having trouble. Let me give this a try, because I had already been learning about all this, but I didn't really have the right student to try it out with. And I did it, and it just accelerated her process. I think I worked with her for 4 months, 2 hours a week. Her oral reading fluency went from 16 words a minute to 46 words a minute in 4 months. I mean, she's still behind, but huge gap was closed because we could accelerate just so much faster through all of the vowels. I mean, we finished all the vowels, all of them in 4 months. And I retested her. She scored in the average range on the woodcock, the tower. It was really phenomenal.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I
Okay,
think
how
that's the biggest difference. I do think it is at the advanced code where you're going to see the biggest difference. But I also, again, just to answer your question, I think UFI does start with here's the grapheme and the SH says shh, which is a little bit of a different approach.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't sound like much, but it really is. It's
Well, and
just
I also think teaching the alphabetic principle is huge with this approach. It really is, like having that conversation with student and saying, do you know what letters are? Letters are the pictures of our sounds. So we really, when we're starting with a word and we're going from there. I just assessed, I think I was telling Donna, I just assessed a kindergartner. Yesterday, she knew every single letter sound. She couldn't do anything with it. Couldn't blend, couldn't segment, she couldn't read a word. So all of that letter sound knowledge is nothing if you can't do anything with it. So I think the integration is key with this approach.
I think it'd be kind of cool to use the cue, like draw the picture instead of draw.
Well, phonographics does call them sound pictures.
They do.
Yeah.
It's just our thinking has to be switched.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you do irregular words like from?
It's actually the same way, which is the beauty of this. And I had actually been teaching it this way for quite some time. So you just teach them, we're going to spell from. We're going to learn how to read and spell from. What are the sounds you hear in from? And you have them tell you the sounds. From. And you write a sound line for each. Just like the example when she was giving me the word and I was writing the sound lines, you write the sound line and then you show them the word and you show her, this is from. And then you ask the child to map, and you can point out, and I do point out, I will say, do you notice, look at how we're spelling it's not the way we usually do. That part's a little tricky. So when we're writing this word, we really need to be mindful of that. Think about that. And then the student will say and write from on the sound lines, and they'll do from. And then I have them copy it again. And then we'll erase it. And then we'll write it again from memory. So we will write it multiple times. And then I make sure it's included in the next lesson. It's included in sentences. It's included in the story. We come back to it over and over. I include it in the mixed mapping task. So they're coming back to it over and over again.
When showing the graphemes for letter and sound, for letter, sound, letter, name, knowledge, what are your thoughts on using picture embedded letters?
You know, I've heard the research on that is good. I've just never done it. I don't know if it could be great. If you have a student that just doesn't seem to be able to learn it any other way, I don't see why not. Personally, I've never needed to do it. I've never needed to go that route because even the kids that I do work with, some of whom are, at the first percentile. I just assessed one recently, first percentile. Actually, he was below the first percentile. I didn't even know that existed. It's below the first percentile across the board, this child, in everything. And I still haven't needed to do that. I can still teach him the letters and sounds using the methods that I shared. And he's doing great. He's actually, we just finished reading digraphs, words with digraphs.
Okay, hang on. What's your expected time frame for lessons for small group?
Well, that's a great question. So let's see. I mean, I work with intervention, so I only work with kids who are struggling, and I work in 1 hour blocks. I think if I'm understanding the question, like if you're organizing small group instruction, how much time would you spend? I think, is that the question per group?
Yes, for small group.
Yeah, if you're in an intervention, I think you have to probably have at least a half hour, and you're gonna have to kind of split it up over time. This is a little bit of a shift for me because I was so used to the OG lesson plan. I felt like every time I met with a student, I had to get through these steps, and I've sort of let go of that, thinking that I have to have the same, like do all of the same steps on every lesson. So now I don't do it that way. I have kind of like a sequence of skills. And then I do as much as I can in that time I've got with them. We always make sure we get to some text reading. And then the next time I meet with them, we pick up where we left off and we keep going. I don't know if that helps at all. If you're working in a gen ed classroom, it depends how much time you've got. I mean, I think you can look at what you've got and see which activities can you do that where you get the most bang for your buck. You know, things like word chaining and reading and mapping, and having different tasks that you do. Or if you go through a training program, they're going to give you a lot of information about that because every training program is different. So, you know, if you're doing like a reading simplified, she has certain activities you do in a certain order. If you go through EBLI, that's it's different. It's going to give you very specific activities and you're following a sequence. So every program is a little different. So it depends on what you're using. I don't know how else to answer that. I hope I kind of answered your question.
You may have answered this already, but what about children with poor working memory and processing speed? Does it move too quickly for them?
So it's very interesting that you asked that question. Most of the kids that I work with have issues with working memory. And one of the reasons I started this approach is I had a little girl I was working with, issues with working memory, very slow processing speed. She had, you know, a RAND deficit. I mean, pretty much weak phonological awareness, like everything you could kind of imagine, that perfect storm. And we had been doing OG for 2 years and she's making growth, but not quickly enough. And she really hit a wall. And I thought, I mean, when I tell you this kid kept me up at night, like worrying about her. And I just kept reading I talked to everybody that I knew. I just didn't know what else to do. And I did this. I started to do this. I started to really full on embrace the advanced code, teaching the advanced code the way linguistic literacy tells you to do it, following that. And she started moving. She started moving again. And not only did she start moving again, she was getting really defeated. Like in our OG lessons, she was just, I don't know, she wasn't happy coming. It started to really, intervention for 2 years, that's a lot of intervention. That's too long. It really is. And this kind of gave her new life, and she's got a pep in her step again. She's excited about what we're doing. She's making progress. Her oral reading fluency is improving. She may never fully catch up in terms of her reading rate because she has such severe processing issues, but she was able to really hold on to those different sound spellings. I mean, she needs a lot of review. We have to come back and we have to kind of hit them again. But I was really pleasantly surprised by how well she was able to do that. And I think it makes sense to them. It just makes sense. And we were doing multisyllabic reading as well. That's the other thing. Like we get into multi-syllable work pretty quickly.
Well, I think kids, you know, they come with speech. That's the one thing they got, right? That's the one thing they can count on.
Yeah. And I wish I had started this with her 2 years ago.
Yeah, right.
Which was actually 2.5 years ago. And I kind of wonder how it might have been different.
Sure.
If it had been, I don't know. I mean, I did the best I could and she was making growth, but yeah, it's definitely worth trying. It really is. If you're not sure, give it a try. I've become a believer. I really have.
Tell people, in case people don't know what the advanced code means, what that means.
Yeah, so when we get into the multiple sound spellings, so if you're not teaching, because you know, usually in a structured literacy approach, you're typically teaching one spelling at a time. So you teach AY, and then you wait, and then you teach AI, and then you wait, and then you see it takes a long time to get through it all. Now we're going to learn how to read and spell words with A, and we go through all the most common ones.
And I think the other point that you hit on is that you don't wait for mastery. You can go on with about 70% accuracy. And because kids can start integrating that into their next skill set, it just starts happening. It doesn't have to be at mastery. I think that's like a misconcept that OG is just hammers away. You just can't move. You cannot move. And there's other programs too that are like that.
Yeah. Well, and that was something that was, my program actually wasn't like that, which is probably why it was so effective, because we didn't do that. Every single time I met with, even when I was doing OG, we were trained that every time you meet with a student, you review and you teach something new. And what that new thing was totally individualized to that child. So we always just kept going. But it's the vowels. They have to have access to the vowels and they have to have it faster. And I think that's one of the biggest differences from my training to this approach, is it gives them those vowels. They need those vowels to be able to read uncontrolled text. And keep in mind, that doesn't mean they can spell all of these words. Spelling takes years. There's a reason you continue to do spelling in 3rd grade. You continue to do spelling in 4th grade and in 5th grade. Like they're not going to master the spelling, and don't expect them to, and don't hold them back because they haven't mastered the spelling. The reading comes fast. I was shocked. I just did this with a 1st grader who was struggling. I started meeting with her in September. I only see her once a week most of the time, and we just did all the long O sounds. And I could not believe. And then I was away. She went away because it was holiday break. She came back. You know, she remembered every single one. She even remembered them off the top of her head. I couldn't believe it. I said, what are all the ways to spell? Oh, she rattled them off and wrote them. I just almost fell off my chair. And this was a kid that could hardly read CVC words in September. And she's in 1st grade.
We underestimate their capabilities.
Well, and also that it makes sense to them. I think this approach just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Any
Okay.
other questions?
There are no other questions that I can see. And thank you for your expertise. I just love listening to you. You're such a great speaker. I'm a Wilson person. Here's a question. How do I learn more about this?
Well, I'll tell you what I did. I read the book, Diane McGinnis's book. It's a great book. The Reading Reflex book is another good book from Phonographics. I kept learning though, because I felt like there's needs to be more. So I kept trying to learn more and more. I did the Reading Simplified training. I did the Phonographics training. I'm constantly watching Nora Travazi's webinars at Ebly. She's fantastic. Ebly does a lot of really unique things too. There are just so many great trainings out there. So I would recommend doing a training if you can. I know there are issues. There's cost to consider. There's the speech to print Facebook group, definitely.
Yeah, right.
And that's free. You can learn about it. A lot of former OG based programs, people who did those are on that group. And so they can speak from experience, how it was different. And I have to tell you that hearing from other people helped me kind of make a full jump in with both feet, just hearing the success stories from other people. But there are a lot of webinars out there, a lot of free videos you can watch to learn more. But if you can swing a training, I would recommend doing a training. I hope this gave you at least on a little bit of a background to, try some things out with some students. But if you're really serious about it, you want to do some sort of a training.
I agree. All right, everyone. Thank you. We're going to continue doing more and more webinars on speech to print or structured linguistic literacy. And so watch for it. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Jennifer, for your time and expertise.
My pleasure. I love talking about literacy. My husband's happy. He doesn't have to listen to me yap in his ear about it all day.
Someone else will.
He knows way more about literacy than a finance guy should.
Mine as well. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.